All right, well, welcome everyone. We're very excited to have John Whalley with us here tonight to talk about his beautiful, amazing show, Timeworn. Just a couple of initial words about format. So we do stream the talks live on Facebook, so if you ever can't make one of the talks, you can watch it on Facebook. The live version gets automatically recorded, so you can always go back and look at past talks on Facebook, and also Reggie gives us a clean copy that we post to YouTube, so if you ever want to see any of John's past talks, they're all on YouTube. And for those who are watching on Facebook, if you have any questions, you can type them in the comment section, and I'll read them here to John in the gallery. So just I wanted to say a few words about the exhibition. So when we first started getting the images, I thought, wow, these are absolutely fantastic, and even for John, they're amazing. And then when I actually saw them in person, wow, okay, they're even better than the images. Unbelievable. So, you probably have all already seen, but for the people online, and in case you haven't, and we do this for all of John's shows, the actual objects that are depicted in the paintings, except for obviously the barn and the outside things, are in a case on the back table there. And I always love having them because you can really see what John is up to and sort of what he's doing. And John is absolutely in the American realist tradition, influenced by the Dutch masters. But that sort of description doesn't really capture, to me, does not capture what he's doing, because when you look at these paintings and you look at the objects, you can see that he's really capturing the spirit of the objects. It's not just a photorealistic depiction of them staged into a still life. I mean, he's doing something more. He's bringing them back to life. He's telling their stories. Or, as John might put it, he's responding to the beauty that speaks softly. Mm-hmm. So before I turn it over to John, though, let me just say a few words about his background. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, and currently lives in Midcoast, Maine. He received his BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design, and his work is in many national and international collections, including the Portland Museum of Art, Bates Museum of Art, Colby College Museum of Art, Museum of Biblical Art in Dallas, Texas, the Puratos, is that right?
I think so, Puratos.
Okay. Yeah. World Heritage Library in Belgium, the Georgia Museum of Art in Athens, Georgia, and the Kemper Museum of Art in Kansas City. With that, I'll turn it over to John, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, John. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's really nice that you could be here. I'm glad you showed up. And my wife Ellen is sitting somewhere. There she is. She's standing right there. So I've asked her if she would be willing to, we've talked a lot about what I was preparing to share, and I said if I happen to skip something that you're noticing, she's going to help me stay on track. So she's going to be my, as she calls herself, my faithful assistant. Is that the right word? Faithful?
Lovely.
Lovely, yes, lovely. Oops. Well, anyhow, I thought I'd start. I wrote a little, a little description of the show, the thinking that I went into in preparing the work this last year, and I kind of crystallized what my intentions were, what I was kind of after, and I thought I'd read it, which I had it right in right order, darn it. Here we go. So I'll read it. It summarizes it in the least amount of talking. The idea for the show centered around my choosing objects or scenes that somehow spoke to the passage of time, of survival and endurance, whether it be a century-old fish house on the Maine coast and over there, things I've discovered in nature, or tools and objects that Ellen and I have collected around the States. My new word for the year is ubiquitous. I've been trying to learn a new word every year. I don't set the goal too high. One if I get one. Ubiquitous means they're everywhere. I'm very proud of learning that word. So anyhow, they're tools or objects collected around the States, ubiquitous flea markets, yard sales, and antique stores. The subjects for this show were carefully chosen to offer different stories of how time leaves its mark on all things. In some cases, I've paired similar objects to show how the members of a family might wear the effects of time differently. And I didn't even do it consciously. When the show was completed, I looked and I thought, there's 2 of these, 2 of those, and two for them, and there seems to have 2 shells. Last time I think I had mostly 3 items because that's a very pleasing number, but for some reason I gravitated toward 2, and it wasn't even intentional. So that was kind of interesting to see when it was all over. But what it wound up doing was showing how 2 different objects, similar yet are different. It's a nice pairing, kind of. One can be left imagining the activities that cause the patinas and textures etched on objects, or in the case of seashells, pine cones, or the dog skull, how these objects that once sheltered life within now take on a different kind of life and meaning of their own, devoid of their authors. Wrenches, forks, and putty knives were put through much labor to wind up looking just so. And the watch I found on the beach, this piece, it was in a clay bank, and with all the wind and weather we've had, it's broke loose, and that had been lost in time until it got washed out of the side of the bank. The watch I found on the beach at low tide set upon a worn tile inscribed with measurements spoke to me of timekeeping and the ways that we measure our time here. Having just reached my 70th birthday, not inside, but certainly outside, the theme of time spoke to me in a new, richer way, and I hope that this group of paintings and drawings will have something to say to the viewers as well. So that's kind of my thinking behind that show. And just touching on that idea of aging, I've heard something recently that talked about having coins. When you're younger, you have a pocket full of coins that seems to have no bottom. You just spend, every day you wake up and we see it in our sons. They're just doing life, and they're spending these beautiful moments of coins like every day, and there's always more. And when you turn 70, something changes because you reach in your pocket, I am, and it's like there's not that many coins there anymore, and I'm finding myself saying, if I'm going to spend one of these coins, of which there aren't that many left, I want to make sure I'm spending it on something really worthwhile. And it's changed I'm finding it's changing how I live each day and the decisions you make, Things that were really important have kind of faded, and other things you see differently. So that's an interesting shift. So that was all going through my head during doing some of this stuff too. Okay, I just thought I'd share a little bit. When I was a kid, my mom was an art teacher and an artist. She went to Pratt Institute, and we had oil paints and drawing equipment around the house, and the smell of linseed oil in the air, and I loved it. And so she let me paint, and I have some paintings in our house that I did when I was like 8 years old. And curiously, I hadn't even heard of Maine or seen Maine, but they were of a Maine lobster shack. And I painted it a number of times. So going upstairs in our house, we have the progression of these lobster shacks. And so that was certainly the influence of artwork early on. And then one time, she had a book of artwork, and this painting was Rembrandt's, it's in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, Rembrandt's Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer. And some of these are very warm and like orangey, but this is closer to the original. But I'm sure the one I saw was much more like rich yellows and stuff. But what I do remember, and I was only a little kid, was this gold thing. And it's one of those moments you look back on, it's like, I was like fireworks going off inside when I saw that gold, and I thought, that's paint, but it's gold, but it's paint, And so that was one of the things I do remember, like just turning me on fire to want to make paintings, Just, it's funny, the things, of all the paintings in the world, that was the one that got me. And so that was some of the little stuff. So in high school, my teacher had us in art class, had us draw 2 drawings a week. You had to bring in 2 full drawings. And that was really good. I loved just drawing objects, like a small still life mostly. And like every week, was doing that. And it really was a thing I really enjoyed doing. Then at Rhode Island School of Design, one course that meant a lot, that really wasn't an art course, and I can't remember the title of it, but this teacher had a father in his 90s, and he got his father's friends to agree, along with the father, that every week we would go and spend most of the day with one of them. His father started it off, and what he did is just told us stories about his life. And we got to hear from a childhood on up all he experienced, and we just sat there and were enwrapped with these stories of people. And then the next week we'd meet somebody else, and that really stood out to me, just hearing someone's stories and how important it is, and telling stories, you know. So through these inanimate objects, I like to tell stories like that. And I do some portraiture, but I love kind of telling a personal story through objects. So and that was art school. And then, okay, sometimes the stories as an artist that you do, here I am making these stories. And as an example, these wonderful connections happen. This is a book we found 3 or 4 of these up in a New Hampshire junk shop. These old hymnals from like 1840 or something. But they're all this size, and they made tons of these. So we got 4 of them, I think, the first day, and the guy wanted like $25, $50 for each one. And I said, well, we can't pay that. And he goes, what could you pay? And I said, I think we gave him 5 each. I said, would you take 5? And he goes, okay. So I got 5 of these. I got 4 of these for $20. And then we started seeing them on like bottoms of old boxes at flea markets and stuff. And I now have like 30 of these, all different titles. So anyhow, I did a painting with this once. It was here at one point, Roy. And I got a call from this man in New York City, Aldo. And he called and he said, I belong to the Brooklyn Shape Note Singing Society, long title. And I saw you had this book in a painting. I go, yes. And he goes, do you have the book? And I said, yes. And he goes, oh, great. I've translated all of those books except this one. I can never find it. So I sent it to him in the mail. And then about most of a year later, he came back and he had made a digital version of that book. Isn't that cool? And get this. This was the good part. In the very back of the book, it's here somewhere, he has a hymn that he named for us, Illinois. So they drove up one weekend and they came into the studio and they sang our hymn, the hymn they wrote for us, to the 2 of us, and I have recorded it. It's really cool. But I mean, I love those little. I made a story in the painting, and then the painting went out and started making more stories, you know. So I thought that was kind of neat. And also, there's this man that bought a painting called. It was called. I think it was the name of the first show I had here, called World of Wonders. 20 years ago. And he was out walking around, and somewhere he saw a picture of the painting. And he called us, and he said, I'm a Harvard professor, and I've written a book I was going to call it World of Wonders, but I noticed you have a painting called World of Wonders. So I'm changing my book to Worlds of Wonder, to kind of, not that it would have been a problem for me to use that title, but, and then he said, would you mind if I came over? So we've become really good friends. He's a wonderful man, and I mean, he's really become a very good friend of ours, and through the title of a painting, you know. So this, again, the painting turns into a greater story. And there's another one of these. Oh yeah, I had a drawing here called Tool Mark once, and it was this man made this tool to apply, plaster with. And on the wooden handle of it, it said E. George. E. George. And so I put it in the drawing because it was on there. And the tool markers, everybody back then would put their names on their tools so that when they cleaned up at the end of the day, all the men used the tools in common, but they separated their tools. I didn't know that. So anyhow, I'm in here with Peggy, when Peggy was here, and she goes, what's really cool about this, John, is I know a man named Eric George. And right then, right, he walked by. She ran out in the street and got him and brought him in and said, you gotta buy this piece, but he didn't. But I thought, how funny is that? So this happens more than you'd think it would, and it's kind of nice. It's when something you include in a drawing resonates with somebody on a different level. So,
John,
yes.
didn't you also have an interesting story with the bread, the loaf of bread, and the person commissioned you to do other pieces, and the painting is now in...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that was also an interesting...
Yeah, that was I was doing paintings of sourdough bread. And then a woman we know in Germany, I'll make it a quick story, but the woman we know in Germany, we know because she stays in a bed and breakfast near our house, and we got to meet her, and so now we're friends. So she said, I want to get your work in Europe. And I thought, well, good luck, you know. But, so she wound up wanting to write a book about sourdough bread. And so she needed to have 12 apostles of sourdough, one chapter for each person, and they would take the starter that she would give them from the mother lode over there in Belgium. You'd take the starter and add something to it to make it your special starter. So I decided to use maple syrup and blueberries because I live in Maine. So we made the bread, and she wound up coming over here with the representative of Puratos, which is like General Mills of Europe, and the baker. So the baker came over, and the cameraman. They made a little movie. You can see it online. It's pretty funny. But and I was very sick at the time, so I looked more like a skeleton than I do now. And so we were in the kitchen making this bread, and I don't necessarily have a very professional way of making it. I just make it the way I want to. But I'm standing next to the master, and he's looking at me, he's being very polite, and he goes, well, why don't we try this? You know, it turns out I was doing everything all wrong, and I didn't know it. And I'm the apostle of sourdough for America. So anyhow, she came out with a book, and we're the last chapter in the book, and they have put photographs in our area, in the mills. Oh, and then they commissioned me then to do a painting of sourdough bread. So it's a large painting of a barrel, and anyhow, it's over in, if you go to their kind of like a small museum of sourdough bread, they have all the starters of the world in these refrigerators going around the entire perimeter. And when you go in there, there's a wall with wooden slats, and they cut a hole in it, and my painting is inserted in the wall kind of right across from our blueberry starter, you know. So anyhow, it was an adventure, but that came from, like Roy was saying, just from doing a painting of sourdough bread, you know. So you never know, it's kind of neat. I'm not getting to my work here yet, I'm sorry, we'll get there. So if you think about old tools and their stories, Ellen had the good idea of maybe bringing some tools that let's see. This is something I make sometimes where it became a drawing, but it's like a little an idea for a drawing, and you can use that as a background. Like some of these, you know, you set up a drawing, and you can actually make them into a shadow box kind of a thing. But here's some ideas, like some handmade tools. Like this, these are handmade tools. It looks like it's for getting grout out of a curved surface maybe, and then this is, I don't know what, but it's a wonderful little tool. And this is not a tool, but it's been used and used and used for something. I don't know what it is, but it's very interesting. And then we have, somebody took the effort of putting this all on a handle, and it's handmade. They put leather on the handle. What a work of love, huh? And what Ellen and I were talking about this morning is how people back then didn't make something and just wear it out and throw it out and get a new one. They, I have dozens of these wrapped in electrical tape, to hold them together. This one I did a drawing of it once, called it Veteran. And as I'm getting older, I'm feeling more and more like the screwdriver, you know. But look at the texture on that. I don't know if you can see it over there, but it's just really something. And then this one, look at that one. They put string around it to hold it together. And then, you know, the signs of age. Like here's a guy was hammering something, and I love just to see all of the. And then this thing felt crack in the middle, and I put. So when we go in to buy things in flea markets, they almost give these to us, because who in the right mind wants any of these things? But to me, they're just beautiful little characters. Like, it's almost like you're on a subway car just in New York and looking at all the people on the subway car, just like one's really more interesting than the next. And here, this cracked open, so they put wire on it. And the point is that what they do now when they make things like, they make them to expire. My laptop years ago started slowing down really quickly, and I went to my son who knows all about that, and he said that they actually program them to do that, so that you have to go and buy a new one. It's part of the way it's made is to just, and then with my iPhone, if you break something, how do you fix an iPhone? You know, you used to be able to open things up, even your car, you could fix things. So I just look back on the tools of yesteryear, and I have a real affinity for that because my dad was a tool guy. So, so these pieces here, a lot of them come from that, I don't know, just that reverence for the way things were and to make things last. My father was a Depression baby in the 30s and 20s, you know, and he always scrounged up stuff, and the basement was full of pieces of wood that my mother said, "Why are you saving it?" Well, someday it'll come in handy, you know.
We're still using them.
We're still using his tools, you know, and stuff. But my grandmother used to wash the tin foil after supper, you know. So I mean, there was an appreciation then that I really love. So that's just a look at those things, and the stories that go with them. My studio is a lot of shelves with thousands of items, all kind of organized. So in preparing a piece, you have a whole palette of objects to work from, you know. So it's a really nice environment. It's kind of inspiring. And I read something that I really liked, and I'm going to read this before going into the individual pieces. This was a book by G.K. Chesterton. He lived in the early 1900s, late 1800s. And he was writing a book, and he was describing, well, I could just read it maybe, and you could hear it yourself. But the first part, he's talking about people think that there's something that's, there's an extravagance to having many things, but he says, I think there's an extravagance to having few things. He said where some people felt they were an unending, where some people just, the volume of things, he goes, I felt so happy with the few things, and then he explains it. He goes, these subconscious convictions, and this is like Old English kind of stuff. These subconscious convictions are best hit off by the color and tone of certain tales. Again, stories. Thus, I have said that stories of magic alone can express my sense that life is not only a pleasure, but a kind of eccentric privilege. I may express this other feeling of cosmic coziness by allusion to another book I always read in my boyhood, Robinson Crusoe, and this is the part I like, which I read about this time, and which owes its eternal vivacity to the fact that it celebrates the poetry of limits, nay, even the wild romance of prudence. Crusoe is a man on a small rock with a few comforts just snatched from the sea. The best thing in the book is simply the list of things that he saved from the shipwreck. The greatest of poems is an inventory. Every kitchen tool becomes ideal because Crusoe may have dropped it in the sea. It is a good exercise in empty or ugly hours of the day to look at anything, the coal scuttle or a bookcase, and think how happy one could be to have brought it out of a sinking ship on a solitary island. But it is better to exercise still to remember how all things have been had by a hairbreadth escape. And I love this sentence, everything has been saved from a wreck. And all these tools have been saved from a wreck. People, somebody died and they just want to get rid of all the stuff, or rather than take it to the dump, they'll see if they can get a few bucks for it. And we feel like Ellen and I are going in there and rescuing these little orphaned objects, Not every one of them, but the ones that really deserve another chance. So anyhow, he says one last thing. Men spoke much in my boyhood of restricted or ruined men of genius, and it was common to say that many a man was a great might have been. To me, it is more solid and startling fact that any man in the street is a great might not have been. And he was saying that the part I got in the story was that when Crusoe rescued these things from the ship, because there were so few things he could get, he treasured every one of them in a different way than if he just had everything wasted, just had tons of stuff, And so it's kind of, he gets at the kind of feeling I have towards some of these objects, kind of an affection and reverence of who used these and the fact that they were saved from oblivion, by Ellen and I. I can't believe I met her, because how many women would want to be out there in the garbage rooms with you? Anyhow, maybe there's a lot. So that's G.K. Chesterton. And then, okay. The process of working, I noticed questions about how these were made. There's oil, egg temper, and graphite drawings. And by graphite, it's mostly pencil, but I have graphite sticks and graphite powder as well. But these two are egg tempers, and that, I don't know how many know about egg temper, but it's what they had before oil paint. And you take the dried pigments that are like powdered colors, and you take an egg, and you crack it, and you put the oat yolk in your hand, and then you make the yolk go into this hand, you dry this hand off. You go back until the sac of the egg is completely dry, and then you pick up the egg yolk like this. You could try it next time you have eggs at home, it's kind of fun. And you hold it there, and then you take a pin or something and just puncture it and let the yolk drain into a baby food jar, to which you add equal amount of pure water. And you just shake it up, and it becomes this creamy liquid that's kind of like heavy cream it has the consistency of heavy cream. And then you put it on a palette and take colors and grind them into that, and that becomes the binder. Like linseed oil would be the binder for oil paint. This is the binder for egg temper. The advantage is you can put layers and layers so thinly that you can see the previous layers. So it's like weaving a fabric almost, and there's no texture. I mean, it stays very flat. Because you don't want to put it on thicker, it will crack and it has to be put on very thin. And so you can get some very good detail with it too. And it's put on a panel, it's like a masonite or a wood panel where you take rabbit skin glue, which isn't rabbit skins anymore. It's like gelatin. And you mix it in a double boiler. And then you put whiting, which is precipitated chalk. It's a white powder. And you mix that at a certain proportion, and you wind up with this creamy liquid that's pretty warm. And you put it on the panels on both sides while it's warm, and give it like 8 coats on each side. So it's an all-day process to make a half dozen or a dozen panels. And then when they're dry fully, you sand them with sandpaper, and it becomes like this white slate. It's like a chalkboard slate. It's beautiful. And that's what these are painted on. So that's the process of this. And you can do number of things to add texture. For this one, I was very frustrated with it because I had gotten these pretty where I wanted them. Like the background wasn't working. And then I thought, well, if you're painting a trowel, I mean, what is that called? Trowel? Putty knife, of course. Then wouldn't it stand to reason that maybe they used that to put the plaster on this, something like it. So I mixed up the paint and I put it on with the putty knife. And layer after layer, and I scraped it off more on. and eventually wound up with a texture that I really was, to me, very true to a random. I tried not to think of it being a painting, but just like a wall I was working on and just not paying attention. And that's when some of these nice things happen. So you can really get some beautiful textures with that. And then the oil paint are done on panels, and it's, again, I use fairly thin layers of color, so it's a lot of glazing and stuff. And then the pencil, it's done on, this was done on Stonehenge rag, 100% rag archival paper. I bought the roll of this down here. There used to be an art supply store in the 80s down on, what's that street?
Milk Street?
Milk Street. Maybe it's the one that's out the other end of Portland that was there then, I don't know. But anyhow, I ordered this roll. It was 52 inches high and about that big and weighed, it must have been like 300 pounds. I'm not exaggerating. You needed to carry it with a cart. And I'm still using that roll after all these years. It's gotten smaller, but the reason I got it was they would charge me $10 for a 4-foot sheet, because I was doing large drawings that size. And then I figured it out, if you bought the whole roll, it was only $3 a sheet. But I've lugged this stupid thing around with me my whole life, and you can't let it get dent, because if you dent it, it goes in like 3 layers. See, I did that once, and I lost like all the money I was saving. I probably had lost them. So, but anyhow, I still have it. If anybody wants to try any, I can cut you a piece.
Value has appreciated.
But it is a beautiful paper. It's just a beautiful paper to work on. And the smaller ones, I've used watercolor paper, hot press watercolor paper, Arches, and then Fabriano, I think, makes a nice paper. So that's it. And the graphite is put on, like I said, with either, like here I might put in some of the gray with a very fine steel wool with graphite powder, and then go back and draw into that, but that would lay down the undertone of gray. But if you just leave it like that, it looks like you did that. But then I go in the pencil, and it takes a long time to make it look very present-like. And then the pencils I use are like regular ones from the hard pencils, H pencils, right through the B pencils. And then my father used to have this, and I have it now. It's architect's drafting pencil where you put the leads in and you go like that. Gets a really sharp point, which I use a lot in some of the finer work. So if you have any more questions with that as we go on, you can stop and ask any specifics. So that's the process. Okay, well, what I did here was, starting with number 5 there, I worked my way around, and I'll just read a couple comments if you have any questions. The first one has probably more comments than the rest of them, so don't worry. But back in the 91, I was in Brazil living for a while, and it was a small town outside of Sao Paulo, a very small town, like a hamlet. And I was walking down the street one of my first days there, and it's a dirt road, and I didn't really speak the language very well yet. And I'm seeing all this money in the road, and everybody's very poor, and yet there's all this silver money, and I'm picking it up, and it's Brazilian money. So I'm like filling my pockets with all these coins. I thought, this is a windfall. And people are laughing at me a little bit, and that night somebody where I was living said, in Brazil we change the currency every few years because they go bankrupt. And they just erase everything, and they start a whole new currency. And it's like, we don't have any financial problems anymore. We have all new money. And so, in fact, I wrote a little thing. I remember the thrill of walking along the town streets on my own whenever it was sent for groceries or supplies. It was a thrill for me to be in a foreign place, a new world. My Portuguese was very limited, so I would walk amid the rattle of a language that was still not my own. Much the same feeling for me as did snorkeling off the coast of Florida. The bestowal of privilege at being admitted into a realm of a very real world that had pre-existed before my arrival, whose ways and smells and sounds and contents and occupants were being experienced, at least by me, for the very first time. I felt like a secret agent. like walking around. Nobody knows I'm not one of them. I look like one of them, and it was kind of fun until I opened my mouth and the jig was up. But anyhow, that's what I was walking in. I just wrote here, I walked along a dirty sidewalk looking down at the street where there were more sand than dirt. And I saw silver coins. I picked them up. And then seeing another and another, I picked them up as well. And then I continued for a block or two picking up coins. And apparently, to deal with various recurrent financial crises, the government of Brazil changed their currencies every so often. They literally created new bills and coins with new names and began their new system from scratch. It sounds a bit like what my brother used to do when we were kids. If he was losing the game, he just threw the board up in the air, and started over again. So anyhow, that one, that is a 5 franc note that somebody gave me, and I loved the colors of it. And I loved them so much, I exaggerated them from the actual one that you see laying there enough that I was pleased with it. The kind of glow it had. It didn't have quite that glow, but. And then we found this number 5 in an antique shop, and it's like brass, I believe, and it got all oxidized. So you have that, and then the background was a scoop for a boat that a man had made out of copper, and he used to scoop his boat out, and the back of it was all copper with rivets. And I saw the rivets, I saw the holes in the 5, and I saw the 5 talking to the 5 note, and it just seemed like such a wonderful little thing going on there. And if I was French, I would really probably appreciate it even more. But anyhow, that's where that whole idea came from. And Ellen will tell you, I started that about 10 years ago, and I never could quite get over the initial getting it made, but finally this last year I did it. So it's a long time coming. The next one, scissor tail and seashells. My father had a collection of little cards, and there's one in that painting, and there's also one over in the Kingfisher painting in that little cubby hole. Those are 2 little cards of about 100 or so, 120 I think, that came in baking soda boxes back in the 1920s and 30s. Yeah, I don't know what they were doing in there, but it was promotional or something, but I don't know how my father got 125 of them, because unless somebody just said the other day that maybe they used baking soda for, what was it? Somebody came up and said, oh, they might have used it for this. And I thought that made sense, but I forget what it was. But anyhow, he has this little stack of these cards that are all yellowed and round at the edges, and he obviously really enjoyed them as a kid. You can see his fingerprints all over them. And on the back, it has a description of the bird and the habits of the bird and everything. They're quite beautiful. So I included these in the storytelling in those 2 pieces, those little things. And the envelope I love with the round postage marks and the stamp, and had the postage marks kind of come around and echo the shape of the shells, and just kind of come up with a composition that was interesting, and the lettering on the left was just very beautiful. So that's kind of where that came from. And in the studio, I have a whole bunch of boards and pieces of metal that I make backgrounds out of. So you can kind of select the right background. You have choices. The dog skull I found when I was 15. I was figuring it out. That is 15 from 70. 55 years ago, right?
Don't look at me for the math.
Yeah, 55 years. 55 years ago, I found that, and I've been lugging that around all this time. But when I was in art school in 1970, this is in 73. I did this in 73. This was a lithography, a stone lithography class, and this was the first pass. I did that drawing, and then we printed it. And then I did more drawings, the same drawing, but just added stuff. I didn't take anything away, I just added more. That's the same skull I used. So that skull and I go way back. But it's interesting because the year that I found that, I got mauled by a German Shepherd, a New York City police dog, and I dragged all over the place by the dog and had stitches on my legs. And so that image is nice, but as long as it's dead, it's okay. That was that. 2 forks. Oh, no, yeah, 2 forks. I like the fact that there's 2 of them, and one of them is bandaged, and they're laying in bed, maybe it's like a hospital bed, and you know, somebody's caring for them next to them, and I put that on an old board that I think people did that kind of tatting or something. It's some kind of thing where you pin things to the board and work from it. I'm guessing, but there's thousands of little like pinholes in that wood. So if you go close, I tried to put them in, and I just love the warmth of that little. That's the yellow thing is a box that's holding a sharpening stone. So I just thought it made a perfect little bed for the 2 of them. So. And then Fisher King. Behind our house, we live on the Great Salt Bay of Damariscotta River, up near the end of it. And there is a kingfisher behind our house when you go back there, and noisy little guy. And there's a mussel bed too. So I liked how the mussel shell in some way kind of echoed the shape of the kingfisher, or at least the color. And that's on an old Excelsior container of, I think it's pencils or something. I really can't see it from here, but I know it's Excelsior. And then I put it on a board that I had. This is the board I put it on. This board I got in Rhode Island. It was they were getting rid of an old factory, and it had been working in glass. And they take the glass out of the kiln and stick it on this, and it would burn. Sometimes it would burn these rings. So I bought about 6 of these for $5 each. And they're about that big. And I just love that. Something about the shape, the circular shapes. Once I dug up a nest of snapping turtle eggs and laid them out on this and photographed it. And it's a wonderful picture, but as a painting, I don't think it would have a lot of. Plumb bob, that's the painting there. That's an oil. And that is, the thing that I was thinking about with that one was, I was thinking about plumb bobs, and this is, when I was a kid, they were building the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in Brooklyn. And to get the highway that comes off the Brooklyn end to come around, they had to destroy a whole neighborhood. And my grandmother's house was the last house that they didn't have to destroy. So it used to be a beautiful neighborhood, and she was like now just at the end of a highway. But I remember my father taking me out, and he said, he was a physicist. And he said, do you realize that the curvature of the earth, that tower is going straight up, and this one's going straight up. But if you measure across the top, there's 5 or 6 inches further apart at the top than the bottom. And I'm like, wow, to think of that. And it was, they were constructing it at the time. So when they were building it, he was telling me this. So that piece, the idea of a plumb bob is so nice because it's like, I remember Buckminster Fuller College saying there's no such thing as up and down. It's only in and out from the center of the earth. There really is no up and down. It's always anywhere on earth you're actually, so it's an interesting little fact. But so anyhow, the plumb bob is nice because it's used so commonly to like make a wall straight and relying on that invisible force of gravity. So and the string was beautiful. I love that blue chalk line string. What they do is put the plumb bob up and then take the string and go bing, and it would make a straight line. So that's what's going on with plumb bobs. The fish shed is up at Stones Point in Cushing. It looks across to Maple Juice Cove there. And we stayed for a week in the little house on the horizon to the right. And I just spent a lot of the week in front of that beautiful building. But to stand there, you can only stand, you can't get back far enough to, like if you stand here, it's like just looming over you. And to stand back far, you can't really see it anymore. So what I did was I drew it from the vantage point, and the vessel was floating about here. So I changed the perspective to have it like a straight-on portrait, because that's how I kind of felt the power of it, was this beautiful looming It's this beautiful, beautiful building, and it's really old and it's not really used anymore. They have some stuff being stored in there, and Ellen and I found quite a few Indian artifacts on this point. Chalcedony from Nova Scotia that was made into these little scrapers, and we found arrowheads, beautiful little arrows. Anyhow, it was very, we love being there, so that's where they came from. Iron and brass, that's here, right? Yeah, that one up there, the screws. I guess I could come over here, huh? These are oil, and the same background I used. This is a piece of metal I found that was all rusty, and it was a beautiful way to show those beautiful oxidized screws on. And this was a paintbrush, which I realized tonight I really exaggerated the red. When I was doing it, I had a friend named Owen Rogan who had this red hair that went up like just like that. And so I was thinking of him when I did it, and I exaggerated it to be more the color of his hair. And then this piece of wood, it's like, I think it was like, I could guess what it was used for, but it's just a beautiful object. And then set against this darker red, I just thought it'd be a nice way to put that memory down. And also, and then these are two wrenches, which half of you can't see. Would it be okay if I lifted it up? Yep. And I'll set it down. This is two wrenches, and they're similar, made by different companies, and they do a little bit of a different job. One has teeth, one doesn't. And I just saw like the back one is kind of saying something that's annoying the first one. I don't know. They have the teeth, you know, and he's like, rah, rah, rah. So it just, I thought it was kind of humorous, and just kind of what's nice too, again, you have two of the similar function objects, but different enough so it's like a family, you know. How could two kids have come from the same family, you know? So, and then Ellen came up with the title. It's called The Jousters. She thought it was two knights going off to joust. They were going to have those metal things. So that's the title that won that one. And then, did I pass one out? Yeah. Nope. And then whelk shells. This is an egg tempera painting of two whelk shells, which are in the cabinet there. And I just love the shapes. I always loved that, and I wanted to get the light that kind of comes through from above for a dramatic, kind of Rembrandt light I wanted to try. So, and that's very smooth. It's a little bit glossy, a little semi-glossy. And with that in mind, one of the things I like studying is the like how the shapes of those. I like the mathematics of it. So for part of me, it's that, and I'm saving this for coming. Then night game. The lighting was on purpose because these balls, when my sons were little, we were in Florida for a time, and I would take them out to I think it was the Orioles had their, what do they call it? Spring training. Thank you. And it was nighttime, and we go to the stadium and watch them for free. But they'd hit a lot of balls out of the stadium and never go for them. So Matt and Ben would run out, and we'd always go home with a bag of balls. And so I have all these baseballs, and then I picked up some softballs, and this has nails in it, I don't know why. But I made that as kind of a remembrance for me of the ball's origin was at those games, and the lighting was always where they'd find it to be the lights at night up above you, you know. So it was kind of like a little, almost like an altarpiece to baseball, you know. So workmates, these are two more very similar, but different companies, but they're very similar. And you can see over there this little frame we found with a fabric background inside. I just wanted to do a portrait of nice cold metal. So, and that's an oil, and these two, like I said, are egg tempera. Yeah, and obviously once this kept time, but no more, you know. And it's so nice to have found it, you know, and then to brought it in. Now to have it be the star of the show here, it's really, you know, if it could talk, I'd be pretty happy about that. So, and then I like this clay tile because it has these numbers, and that's what this thing spent its life doing, was remembering numbers. And so I laid it on that tile we found. So this is the same place I talked about, walking around to the side of it. I wanted to get a side view. And for me, what it kind of represented a little bit was the feeling of, this is backwards, of course, but if you think of this ship coming up like this, and then this, and then this is like the ship coming up and this behind and in front of it, you know. And I just wanted, it seemed like, from this angle, it felt like kind of a ship looking out to sea, you know. So, and where is it here? The next one, which is called American Arithmetic, because that's the name of the book. The reason I put the yellow pencils on there were, first, the colors just seem to radiate that nice green-blue background. And also, here it is. That too is kind of a memory for me, because when I was a kid, mathematics was called arithmetic. You know, I don't know if they call it anymore, but mathematics was, we did arithmetic, we didn't do mathematics. And so I remember sitting chewing pencils just like that color, and the only other thing that was the other part of my life, was the school bus to school. And the pencils, it kind of had this color with you all day. You're either chewing it or writing in it. So I thought it'd be nice to have that memory kind of in there, the color of the bus. And we were kids. I got a bunch of kids standing around like with pencils and arithmetic, you know. So that's kind of where that came about. And then the pine cone the pine cone's in there, and this is the mathematics of pine cones. And if you go to the top of the pine cone and go around, you know how they kind of go around. If you go up one direction, and I counted on this one, if you go one direction, it's 15 from top to bottom. But if you go the other way, it's 21. And that is part of the sequence called the Fibonacci sequence, which is like 1 and 1 is 1, 1 and 2 is 3, 2 and 3 is 5, 5 and 3 are 8, 5 and 8 are 13, 8 and 13 are 21. So those patterns usually follow that sequence. So I just love that kind of stuff. So I always loved an opportunity to draw a pine cone. And this happened to be sitting on the railroad tracks behind our house. And we don't have any trees like that. And it was just sitting right we walked along, it was sitting right there, not completely perfect, not like crunched or anything. So it seemed like it was my little friend at the moment draw. So that's, any questions about any of the pieces or anything else that we spoke about? Yes?
Do you profile who buys your artwork? Because you're talking about how some of the tools are, they've repaired, and that's not the way people handle tools today. Do the younger population, do they get it?
I'm not sure about that. I've never thought of that. I never asked. That'd be interesting to do that, you know? Yeah.
I mean, everything is wonderful about your work, But what amazes me especially is the quality of light in the images like that one there just blows me away. The way that works in it. And the light reminded me a little bit of the light, how it was used in that Rembrandt
That's true, yeah.
painting. Is that something you think of? Or is that,
Yeah,
you use the word reverence before, and it's a referential light, I think.
Well, the first book I did was called In New Light, and I really do, light is the theme, really. It runs through it all, yeah. I try to pose things in light that's the other nice thing. You can, I have plexiglass that you sand with fine sandpaper, so it's translucent. And if the sun's coming in and you put that up, the objects underneath just glow beautifully in that filtered sunlight. Or you can have full sun, or you can have any change of circumstance to make the lighting just perfect for that piece. So that's a lot of the times posing and finding that light. So
Was there a particular moment or drawing that made you realize that you weren't just a good artist, you had a true gift?
Trying to think. I guess I started liking some of this stuff in high school, come to think about it. And there was a girl, Diana Kometz, and she and I were the two artists in the class. And we were kind of like, she was amazing with her. She got older and developed a disease where she can only use her hands, and she did these Ukrainian Easter eggs, like microscopically perfect designs. I don't know how she did them. And I went into more just drawings. That probably happened in high school a little bit. And then I had a teacher in Rhode Island School of Design. His name was Roger Pomprion. And one day I was bringing my artwork to him, and he looked at the paintings and then he looked at the drawings. And he said, "One thing I want to tell you, and you have to remember this." I said, "Okay." And he said, "Don't ever let anybody tell you your drawings are any less than the paintings. You should approach drawings with the same sense of like, don't think of them differently. These aren't like preparation for a painting." So anyhow, I listened to it, and it was nice he did that, because I did look at them more like you can make them like finished pieces. And then
I ended up many years later working with his niece, Roger Pombrion's niece.
in Damariscotta,
Yeah.
he lives now. He retired, and he was up in Vermont or somewhere. I lost touch with him after college, and so the woman she worked with said, "Where'd you go to school?" And I told her, and she goes, "Well, my uncle used to teach there." And it was just, so I sent Roger a book, and I Xeroxed all of his. In RISD, they give you written evaluations. They don't give you a mark. So I got all my evaluations from him and stuck them in an envelope in a book, and I mailed it to him. And evidently he wasn't doing very well, and the people said he really was encouraged by that. And he actually had a show of his work after that. Yeah. So, but anyhow, it's pretty. That's good old Roger. Anybody else? Yep.
I'm curious, at what point do you choose what medium to use?
That's a good question. I think it's mostly intuitive. I can't.
And yet you're kind of hurling yourself into oil or egg temperature.
Yeah, I kind of just, and I have done it in both. I've done a pine cone, the same one in color too. So yeah, but yeah, I think it's a nice relief from color, and you're not dealing with the whole color issue, so you can really concentrate on the values in a drawing, and that's a nice relief after you've spent a long time on a painting. You kind of want to take a vacation from color for a little while, so that's probably what happens. Yep.
To piggyback on that question, so do you start, John, with a drawing and then or do it in light colors and then bring the painting out from that?
Yeah.
Is it a drawing first and then painting?
Underneath this, sometimes I'll use ink in some of the darks, if it's a really dramatic thing. Otherwise, some of the drawing I do is with color, like the areas of color. This had extremely bright orange under it. Started with it. It was like very bright orange. And then the layers of paint went over it so that you can kind of see some of the orange coming through. And it unifies the piece, but you're not aware of the orange really that much. But I kind of drew that in with a fine brush. So, but yeah, sometimes I'll draw in, well, I always draw in the whereabouts. But I'm concerned with egg temper though with the graphite. If there's too much graphite on the panel, the adhesion might become an issue. You know, it's kind of, it resists. It's kind of, it's a lubricant, you know, graphite. So I don't use it too much on that.
But it's pen that you use, not
Yeah.
a pencil or anything like that.
Like an ink wash I'll do. Yep, just to kind of get things where they belong, the values. And the nice thing about egg temper and oil, but if you don't like where it's going, you just start painting right over it, and whatever's underneath it, it's there. Sometimes it works. It's not a negative step you took. That kind of will sink into the background, and a new color will come. But having that color in the background turns out to be a great thing, even though it was kind of a dead end in itself. So that's okay. And any other questions or anything? Yes.
Do you work on one section at a time? Do you perfect one, or do you just keep working on the whole as a whole?
The sooner I can get everything on there of some color or of value. The drawings I work on sections, and on the table what I'll do is it's very thin. This might want to try this if you draw and you have a larger one that you don't want to smear. I have a large drawing table, and this stuff's very thin plexiglass, but it's like you go like this and it wobbles, you know, below. And I have a sheet about this long and about that wide. I have a few sheets, and if I'm working on this section, I can put a sheet here and a sheet here with clamps on the top of the table edge. So you can rest your hand on the plexiglass and work on that area without, and you can see what you've already drawn. It's not like you're putting paper over it. You can't. So that's worked out really well. So I'd recommend it if you.
Is the drawing tables vertical or?
It goes all the way that way to that way.
Which way do you usually work?
About probably 45 degrees maybe. And I have a chair that goes up and down. It's a beautiful table. I got it for free. I was complaining about this little dinky table I had that was wobbling all over, and Ellen heard me mumbling, and she goes, "Why don't you just go on and buy a table?" You know. Oh, brilliant idea. So I did. And it was like the one I wanted was $3,000. So I went on Craigslist, and a professor at Bowdoin College had just put an ad on saying, "I have this architect's drafting table. It's humongous and it doesn't fit in my apartment. I need to get rid of it. First come, first serve." So I got in a truck and went down and we got it for free, and it's beautiful. It weighs a ton, but it's beautiful. So, yep.
Do you approach the landscapes differently from still lives? They feel like totally different to me.
Yeah, it is very different. Yeah, I think there's so much more information in most of my landscapes. So it's how to capture the things you're seeing there in value, and grays and blacks, and yeah. I think it's just a whole different approach to the detail. It's with paint. I don't know. It's you arrive at detail with paint, but with a pencil, it just seems much more direct and conscious. You know, it's not doing a good job of answering that, but it is definitely different. Yeah. Yep.
Which came first, the oil or the graphite of the fish shack, or were they simultaneous?
They were that one first, and this was second. Yeah, I wanted to get right on it, and that one I covered the panel with a beautiful olive green, maybe not much unlike this. Well, that's kind of gold, but not much unlike that. Just because that day was a day like today, kind of very green. The light was very green, and remember it was this all cloudy and green, and so I put that on there. And then the painting was built on that green background. So it gave some of that feel to it. It's not too obvious, but it is behind everything in the painting, so it was kind of an experiment, and I liked how it turned out. So, well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate, and I'll answer any questions or, but thank you for coming. It was really a pleasure to have you here.